Thank you so much for letting me be here this morning. It means a lot to me to be here. I've been always a part of this audience from time to time when you've had preachers here. I was here one time when Tim Henderson was the evangelist. I was here one other time when Jared was the evangelist. And it's encouraging and edifies me to have the opportunity to come and speak before you here this morning and this evening. And I thank you so much for on behalf of my family for us to have this opportunity and have a wonderful weekend that we have had. And I am very thankful. And I know some of you probably have never met me before, but I think 75% of this audience I do know. And I'm encouraged by the visitation from people from far away. I came from Williamstown, West Virginia, and I know some from around Parkersburg area and various other areas. And I thank you so much for having this. Taking your time to come out here and listen to this message I have here this morning. I hope you'll be encouraged and you'll be edified by this message. We've talked about this weekend about how there's no one like us. And it comes from is that discussion we had just at the end of our Bible study about Solomon. How he asked for he asked to be able to rule over God's people. That was the request that he has given God, because God has given this kind of blank check and tells him, whatever you want, you can have it. And after he asks for this wisdom to rule over his people, he gives him everything. And he reminds him that there's no one like you before you, there's no one like you after you. And sometimes we think, as we have discussed all weekend, we think because he's made this statement to Solomon, that he can't make that statement to us. And he has. And one of the things, I'll reiterate what I said on Friday night, you fail to realize how much of an important part you are in God's life. I talked about how we look at today, we think of modern miracles or worldly miracles, and we look at them as maybe a 1 in 1,000 shot, or we think of them 1 in a million shot. And I talked about how we have met our significant others in life. It's a very interesting story how my wife and I met. And we could probably go on and talk about how it was very peculiar how our husbands have met our wives. Do you realize that is a 1 in a billion shot for us to meet the people we have met, even though we have lived probably in the same area, we went to the same school, we lived in the same state. It's still a very long shot for us to ever met. Now you think about the odds of that and then having a child. Statistics will tell us that in order for that one person to meet that one other person, to make one child is 1 in a quadrillion. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Remember, I told you it's okay to make mistakes about pronunciation. Forgive me on my pronunciation, I'll forgive you on your spelling. But you think about how much of a long shot that is. That's how important you are. You're 1 in a quadrillion. And that's what I want to talk about here this morning. We talked about how the devastating consequences of David's sin has caused very negative things to happen in his life. Well, look at our scripture here this morning. I'm just going to flip through the scriptures because we've already read it this morning. And he tells them there in verse 10, he says, "Come and I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. I am giving you something great to do." We never think about the consequences of what would happen if I do this, and something positive does come out of it, right? We look at David, we see how there was negative things that has happened to David because of his actions. We never think about what positive things would come out if we did do something. And here's where the sad thing kind of happens to one of the greatest men we read about in Scripture, Moses. We see that here's his first response when he gives him this challenge. Or wait a minute, you know what? Let me jump ahead here, because sometimes we forget about how we miss out on some things. I got a picture up here. Maybe some of you are familiar with this woman. It's Bette Davis. She's an actress. And an individual came up to her one time and said, I got an idea for this really great movie. It came out of this book. And I got a guy in mind that I want to do alongside with you. His name is Errol Flynn. And I'd like for you to go and do this movie with him. Well, she said no. She doesn't like Errol Flynn. She didn't want to do this movie alongside this guy, and she doesn't care how great the book was. It's not going to be good because I have to work with this guy. Well, Errol Flynn didn't end up doing the movie. Clark Gable did. And the woman who got the part was Vivian Leigh. And maybe you've made the connection by now. The book was Gone with the Wind. She passed up on a great opportunity to do something magnificent because of, I don't like what is being told for me to do. It's that meh kind of moment. I don't know if I want it. It goes into whining sometimes. God has given us great challenges in life, and we act just like that. And we see an example in Moses. And there's his first statement. He says to God, I'm not that great of a man. How can I be the one to go to Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? Sometimes we think that our Christian lives has to be some kind of spectacular story. It's got to be something that's got to be written down in books. It's got to be something has been told over and over again. And sometimes we think in order for us to do something in our Christian lives, it has to be and it should be magnificent. Well, I'm going to disappoint you. In a worldly perspective, your Christian life is not going to really impress a lot of people. However, though, we are considered great in God's eyes. There's been many times that when we find that when we do God's will, we are considered blessed. What does that word mean? Well, blessed means that it's beloved. It is something fantastic. How wonderful it is for us to do these things. How blessed is a man not to walk in the seat of or sit in the seat of the wicked or be with the wicked counsel. How wonderful he's not made the choice to go that way. How wonderful it is that he went this way in the law of the Lord. Sometimes we think that we have to be something spectacular. We don't. Not in a worldly perspective. We can be great men, though, before God. And one of the things that we need to be mindful, as God reminds Moses, is you can do this because I'm with you. And this will be a proof that I'm sending you. After you lead the people out of Egypt, you will come and worship to me on this mountain. You ever look at some of the minor prophets and you saw the rebuilding of the temple? Remember Solomon's temple? And you look through the details of Solomon's temple, and it is something of magnificence. And we see that after it gets torn down, they decide to rebuild it again. It's been a very long and painstaking process to rebuild this temple. And if you look, and I think it's in Nahum, they talk about that temple. And they're a little bit disappointed. It doesn't look like Solomon's temple. It doesn't have the gold. It doesn't have the shininess. It doesn't look impressive like it once was. And there's people that hold on to those old traditions and say, oh, I miss the good old days. Well, God even reminds them at that time. The thing that really is important here is I'm with you. You are great men, and you are great women, and you are great young people. You are great old people. You are great poor people. You are great rich people, because we are among God's people. Last time I checked, God didn't check my checkbook to see how many zeros I had in it. Tonight we're going to talk about how we look at some of the excuses we use in our lives, and we think because we are in one particular category, I can't do nothing. I can find something in Scripture that says, yes, you can. We can be great men. We can be great women. And do not use this idea that because we don't have no eloquent speech, and we'll talk about that here in a second, that I can't do these things. If God is with us, how can we be wrong? Then he continues on. He says, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors sent me, then the people will ask, well, what is his name? What should I tell them? You will find that it's hard for us to talk about this, and you realize. Because when we are around worldly friends, when we're around family that don't know the Word of God, when we're around people at our jobs, when we're around anybody that doesn't is in this group of brothers and sisters in Christ, it is hard to say his name or tell him who sent me. Think about that the next time you have a chance to talk about God with someone. It is incredibly difficult because we think if we talk about these things, then they're going to think of me something totally different. Or if I talk about something that they may be in error on, we're going to sever a relationship. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'd rather have someone be upset with me that will go to heaven than somebody that's going to be my best friend and are going to be condemned to hell. If I love them that much, I'm going to talk about it. If I care for them that much, I'm going to say something. And this is how God tells them. He says, you tell them, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people, I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And he continues on to give a word they understand. Yahweh. It's not going to be something that they're going to be like, oh, wait a minute, what's he saying? It's going to be a word that they understand. Do you realize why when we look at the New Testament or we look at the Bible in general, it's written in 3 different languages? Can you name them? Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. Why is that? We all understand why it's Hebrew, because we say, well, it's going to the Jewish people. Well, why is he writing in Greek? Well, because there's going to be some people he wants to reach out that are not Jewish. Then there's Aramaic. And you might scratch your head at that one. That's because they're the lowliest of the lowly. They're slaves. There are people that are considered less than Gentiles. What's the point? Well, my point's this. He wants to give a message so that everyone here can understand. God is telling him, you tell them this. They'll understand who I am. Sometimes, brethren, we gotta get out of that kind of scared mode when we talk about the gospel, especially if we have this great love and concern for someone. If there's someone you need to talk about that you're thinking about right now, I know if you're like me, right now I'm thinking about my mom. I'm thinking about my brother. I know we're all sitting here and we all have someone in mind. I really need to get a discussion going on with them, or they're going to be lost when this day comes. Take a chance to call them when you leave out this doors this afternoon. Conversations don't last hours upon hours. Well, depending on who you talk to. But just take a chance. I had an opportunity to go to a gospel meeting out Hartshorn Ridge. It's over in Ohio, and my wife doesn't like to decor the place because it's a very narrow pew where they sit at. And I can remember going to this congregation to preach, and this one guy came in, he looked like Santa Claus. He had this big white beard, he had a little bit of a belly, yes, and then he had this big white beard, and he came with one of the Hoskinsons. And I can remember, I think it was Mike, it was his name, and he said, he was one of my farm hands, he said, I asked if he wanted to come tonight. So what's he going to say? No? Sometimes we let those 2 little letters hurt us more than they help us. So take the opportunity, like we see with God tell Moses, said, don't worry about this. I'm with you, and tell him who I am. Then he continues on. Once again, another excuse. But the Israelites will not believe me when I tell them that you sent me. They will say, the Lord did not appear to you. What happens next, kids? Do you remember the rod? The rod that Moses has, he goes, throw it on the ground and see what happens. And it turns into a serpent. And we see that's exactly what happened. Because what do you have in your hand? He says a walking stick. He says, throw the walking stick on the ground. So he threw his walking stick on the ground and it became a snake. And he ran from it. But the Lord said to reach out and grab the snake again by its tail. And he reached out and caught by a snake's tail and became a walking stick again. But that's not the only miracle that we see happens here. Remember, he tells you, put your hand inside your bosom and bring it out. I always thought about, there's been times where I've rode my bicycle as a kid where I fell and I've used my hand to brace the impact, and I've really scuffed it up something horrible, and I was just afraid to see how bad the damage is going to be. I think about that with Moses when he pulls that out and he sees his hand's leprous. Can you imagine the thoughts going through his mind when he sees this leper's hand? Leprosy was something that you died with. It wasn't something that just went away. Now God has told him to do this, and he pulled this out, and his hand's white as snow. It's leprous. And he says, well, put it back in there. Comes back, it's back to normal. And he reminds him, I'm going to do these things that's going to really impress people. And even with all these things that will happen, Pharaoh's heart's still going to be hardened. You think about what we see with the plagues. And you see the challenges that go out before the people of Israel in Egypt. And we see with all these plagues going on, and we see even at the death of his own son, seems like he's got to have the upper hand on this. How many times have we heard statements in our lives where we have had individuals say, if I could just see one miracle, if I could see just one thing come from God, there's where I really believe, and I'd have this great faith because I have seen God do one thing. But even we're reminded in the parable of the 5 brothers that they've had all these things all along and still don't believe. Look at the examples that we see of Christ with his miracles and his healings and some of the crazy things that happen. I think sometimes we take the miracles lightly. I can remember, some of you might know Anthony Venusa. I remember he was telling me about optometry one time. He said for someone to just go from being blind to being able to see is not an instant process. Because they have to recognize shapes, they have to recognize patterns, and then they gradually start seeing things again. This is instant. This is an individual that couldn't see, now became blind. You think about an individual who's ever got hurt and had to go through rehabilitation on a broken leg or a sprained knee or torn tendons. How long did it take you to walk again? It wasn't an overnight success, was it? I had my knee torn up, and I remember he says, you got to learn not to limp anymore. Now think about individuals never walked in their lives. That's not in a finger snap. Sometimes we look at these miracles and we just say, well, that's pretty impressive. No, it's really impressive. This is where God reminds us here that if I'm with you, I'm going to show some proof that I am with you. There's where we see many times of the prophecies being fulfilled. If you can see these things happening and they become true, you might want to listen to what else they have to say. Look how Jesus has talked about these things are going to happen, and these things do fall into place. Jesus, once again, if you believe in these things, you might want to listen to what else I have to say. But he goes on. But Lord, I'm telling you, I'm not a good speaker. I'm not either. Dan Rook's not either. Anybody who's ever preached the gospel can tell you they're not a good speaker either. Because somebody has brought somebody here. Mo Hathley may have baptized me into Christ, but he wasn't the most instrumental part of me obeying the gospel. She was. There's been many people that I've met, and John Underwood's another one. I think the world of John Underwood. I can remember the story he told me. It started with his wife, Rosetta, that was dating him at the time, took him to a service in Pine Street in New Martinsville. Listen to Paul Rockwell. He left angry. It doesn't take a great speaker. What I've been reminded of time and time again is I'm just a closer. You can take it whether it's a sales pitch or you can take it as a baseball one. I like to take it as a baseball one because I like baseball. But you think about one pitcher that goes and has done 7 innings of work or maybe 8. And then there's one guy that comes in and makes sure they win the game. There's instrumental people out there that don't ever stand in a pulpit. They never teach a class. They never lead a song. They never lead in a prayer. There is instrumental people that do great things, and they're never great speakers. They are great individuals. We don't have to be something of eloquent speech to impress people. I remember I had an opportunity to talk to one preacher. He would always stand on the corner of Marietta and he would shout the gospel. And I asked him a question about baptism and he never did answer my question. I left more confused than anything. We don't have to be great speakers. We can be great people. I am even reminded by some individuals, sometimes instead of going out there looking for friends, go out there and be a friend. We must understand that even though we may not have the great talents of some, we still have other talents that we can use. Look how God tells him. He goes, who made man's mouth? Who makes him mute? Who makes him deaf? Who makes him see? Or who makes him blind? Is it not I, says the Lord? Now go therefore, and I will be your mouth, and teach you what you shall speak. Look how, if you ever read the book, The Muscle and the Shovel, and you look at that individual, Randall, tried to teach somebody about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Do you think he was a great speaker? I don't think so either. But he got his point across. And what did he use to put in his mouth? The Word of God. This right here. He didn't have to take 4 years of speech classes. He didn't have to go and learn through some magnificent speakers to understand that this is what he needs in his mouth to get his point across. Sometimes we got to quit getting this idea that it's some well-dressed, some politician that needs to get the point across. Not necessary at all. The evangelist is just to be here to be the closer. Finally, he pleads, "My Lord, I beg you to send someone else." Is it not a shock that God becomes angry? We do the same thing today. And it goes back to being a preacher. When someone gets sick or gets ill, well, that's why we pay the preacher to do that. If there's some difficult situation that happens within a congregation and there's some problems that arise, well, let's let the preacher handle that. Or let the elders deal with this. Or let the deacons deal with this. I shouldn't have to deal with this. We had an individual come to our house one time, and he had this laundry list of all the things that he had issues with within the congregation. And my first response to him when he talks about all these complaints and all these issues, I said, "Did you ever talk to somebody about this?" Not the preacher and not the elders or deacons, but just the one you really have issue with. Did you ever have a discussion with them and then tell them the struggles that you had? Well, no. Well, I think that's what you need to start with. Because that's what we find in a gospel pattern. But we think that when it comes to difficult things that happen in a congregation, someone else has to do this. I can't do it. I'm too busy. I got kids. I got a family. I got jobs. I got this. It's just that it's the same excuse as this. I got something else that somebody else has to do this because I am just too busy for it. First time Nathan and I met, it was at a congregation called Washington, Pennsylvania. Steve Lucas was up there. Maybe some of you know who Steve is. I love that man. He was funny. He was charming. He was had that old Italian in him. He was just a very wonderful man. And he did everything in that congregation. He opened up the doors. If there was a program or a flyer to put out, he did that. He made sure they had speakers every Sunday, and he did it. He did it all. Well, he passed away probably about a year or two ago. So did the congregation. That's how tragic it has become. Because we let somebody else do all the work. And then when he dies or she dies, the work dies too. Don't think for a second God gets upset about this. Because look at the parable of the talents. Remember, there was one that had 5 talents, there was one that had 2 talents, there was one that had 1 talent. You would think if there was anybody who was going to be in trouble with all these talents, it's going to be the one with 5. Doesn't he have the greater risk in all of them? Doesn't he have the greatest opportunity to lose all 5? He's been given a heavy responsibility. But he comes back not with all this worry about how many talents he has in his hand. I doubled this. The one with 2 talents, he comes back, he doubles. The guy with 1, that guy with 1 talent didn't do anything. Became scared. Even if we have 1, let's use it. Look how the Lord still wants him to go. If you need somebody to go along with you, I'll send your brother Aaron, and he would be happy to go. Look how he tells him. He goes, is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he's coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. And I'll be with you and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. Do not be the individual that constantly gives excuses why we don't do something. May I challenge you here this morning as we leave out this beautiful afternoon, and we're going to be around people of like precious faith, and it's like I said, it's been a wonderful weekend. It's been something where it's been truly blessed. May I encourage you, when you take the next steps, let them be those that strengthen yourself and others in God. Can we roll up our sleeves and do these things? Let me finish with one more story. I had an opportunity to meet a preacher over where I was preaching at in Fairmont, and he talked about all these things that ail him. He was in the Navy for quite a spell, and there was a boiler that exploded on one of the ships. And while he was taking individuals to get out of the ship, the boiler exploded. He had shrapnel up his back. There's still pieces in there. He tells me the stories about him being a police officer. My kids love talk to him because they love hearing all the police stories. And he talks about this one time. Well, there's also 2 incidents. He's got 2 bullets in him. One is when he was a kid. Somebody shot him in the foot. But another is when he was pulling somebody over, and a 12-year-old boy in the back seat of the car says, "I'm going to shoot this guy." And takes his parents' pistol and shoots him right there. I said to him, "What has been the greatest challenge of your life?" Mind you, he's a preacher. What has been the greatest challenge of your life? Has it been being a police officer and being a shipman and dealing with all these things that you've dealt with in your life, or being an evangelist? What is the easier job? The police officer. The police officer was the easiest job he had. He said, but this job, being an evangelist, has the greatest reward. We can obtain those same rewards as well. What do we do with this? What do we do with this great pearl, this pearl great price? What would you do with that treasure you find hidden in the field? What would you do with this kingdom that is available to you? Are you going to hold it and hide it with all yourself and say, this is all mine, nobody else will have it? Or will you do something with it? Will you tell others about it? Will you encourage them about it? And be mindful, there is a way to go about it that is acceptable unto God. Or maybe you struggle with the things you deal with right now. You are not alone. As we talk about Solomon and we talk about his greatness, we can see that there were some things that made Solomon weak. We can talk about David, and we see all the great things about David, and we talk our Bible study. There's things that make him weak. There's also things that we find of Moses, and we see even this great man that they refer to constantly in the Gospels has some imperfections. You're not alone. If you struggle, let's do something about it. We have an opportunity to do something about it here. I will help you. I know there's brethren here that will help you in any way they can. Because they want to remind you, you're not alone. Maybe you've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ. I was 27 years old when I obeyed the gospel. I'm 44 now. It took me that long. But it's not too late. And we have those opportunities. If you believe in these things, what are you waiting for? I love how Ananias tells Saul of Tarsus, what are you waiting for? There's no better time than now, and there will be a time when it is too late. If you need to respond, let's do something about it right here, right now, while we stand, and while we sing.